Ideal for Gifted is celebrating National Parenting Gifted Children's Week. Our mission-driven work focuses on three key areas: education, equity, and community. By nurturing the potential of the students in our care through advocacy and programming, Ideal is working daily to shape a virtual community of learning and belonging.
Hello, I'm Dr. Mary Grace Stewart, and I have with me here today Dr. Jann Leppien. Dr. Leppien teaches curriculum courses and thinking skills courses online in the 3 Summers program at the University of Connecticut. She's also the Margot Long Endowed Chair in Gifted Education at Whitworth University, where she recently retired. Julie girl. And Dr. Leppien is co-author and editor of several published books that focus on the development of curriculum for advanced level students. She's worked as an associate professor of education at the University of Great Falls in Great Falls, Montana, where she taught courses in curriculum and instruction, gifted education, assessment and learning, educational research, and methods in social sciences. Prior to that, Dr. Leppien was a research assistant for the National Research Center on the Gifted and Talented. She also worked as a classroom teacher, God bless her, and an enrichment specialist and coordinator of gifted education programs in Montana. So Dr. Leppien, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Stewart. I'm happy to be here with you.
So, Dr. Leppien, the $60 million question for today is, what is enrichment? And maybe what isn't it?
And what isn't it? Enrichment is a phrase or category of learning experiences that we have often labeled in the field of gifted education as opportunities that really are designed to provide students with the experiences that may help them to explore topics and areas of interest and disciplines that they might not have in-depth exposure to. Oftentimes when we go to school, we have, our job is to acquire knowledge, and knowledge about history and knowledge about mathematics and literature. But off of all of those subjects are these sideline areas of interest that people begin to apply their knowledge and skill to, that young people often don't even know are possible. For example, I am extremely interested in how dogs think. And I think it comes from the fact that I have a dog that doesn't think well, but I'm not so sure. But to think that actually there are people who study the brains of dogs is an interesting facet to me. I would never have known that that could be a career. Never would have known, because that's not talked about in school. And so oftentimes, these sidelines, areas of interest, become the very passions that people become interested in enough to explore it, and those become lifelong career goals. So these experiences really are the things that we are hoping young people will engage in as they begin to identify their interests and their passions, since interest leads to job satisfaction, it leads to motivation, it leads to developing such expertise that you create products for humanity. Whatever those interests are, they are to be developed and provided by families and communities and schools so that our young people recognize who they may become based on that interest.
Right.
It could be, and it's not limited to, the arts, music. It could be areas of interest in technology, cultural events. So many kids may be interested in archaeology, paleontology. They may be interested in cryptology, botany, biology, you name it. And oftentimes, because of their age, they don't get exposure to these interesting topics because we have to wait. So enrichment is really to open up the doors for young people to see what's possible.
Awesome. So why is that important for our bright kids?
Oh, it's so important. I think it cultivates a real love, a love affair for life and these areas where we might make contributions to. I do think in many ways, kids have a hard time identifying what they're interested in because what we teach in school are subjects. And those subjects sometimes don't touch them. They aren't seeing the relevance of it because they haven't experienced it. And there's so much teaching about the knowledge of it rather than how does the thing work. I'd rather go to an archaeology camp and learn about archaeology and its history by doing a dig rather than having to experience just the knowledge in a textbook. So enrichment cultivates a love of learning. And of course, there's many more ways that we can do that now. We just don't have to attend camps. We have documentaries. We can even go to museums and participate in events. It also encourages exploration. I'm always fascinated when I ask a high school student, what are you interested in? And they kind of clam up a little bit. They say, well, I don't know for sure. To me, we develop interest our whole life, or should do that. Because I think by the time you are a senior in high school, we should be able to kind of have an idea about where we may go, what areas and fields of study have become really interesting to us, and fields of study we aren't interested in. So it encourages exploration when kids haven't had that experience in these topics. It also boosts confidence. There's a little boy in my community who has specialized in designing model cars to the era of time.
Wow.
And he has done that since about age 8. He is now 16. And movie producers are getting a hold of him because he's able to craft those miniature cars to the time period that replicate it, and they can film that and use it in their films. Now, who would have ever known that? I could see the mother going, yeah, I know you're interested in cars. But these topics, really, the kids become vastly interested in. We should be feeding that through the resources and the types of support and putting them with other kids who are interested, because what it does is boost confidence. When you're 8 years old and you love miniature cars according to a time period, that's not what all kids like. So finding your friends, finding somebody who says you're not different, that you're different. It's actually when we coalesce these kids around their areas of interest that we find friendship. We find collegial behavior because we're interested in what you know about that topic. It also fosters creativity. If interests through enrichment grow over time, then what ends up happening is those kids want to do something with that. They want to produce something new. And that's actually what we end up hoping, is that creative productivity will grow out of those enrichment experiences.
Right. So, are there a lot of different kinds of enrichment? Like, is some in school and some?
Yeah, sometimes, in school, it's problematic, and I certainly have empathy for teachers. Oftentimes, the push is to acquire knowledge at a rapid rate and also to have it put into memory so that we can perform on our statewide tests. And so finding time and opportunity for enrichment to take place sometimes becomes limited from an educator point of view. Yet it can serve as a tool for bringing motivation to the subject. For example, as a classroom teacher, if I had a unit on archaeology, I'd bring an archaeologist in. I would find one in my community. Most communities have somebody who's interested in archaeology, or they're interested in rocks. I don't care what they're interested in, as long as what it will do is enhance that instructional unit so kids see the life of the discipline. If I wanted to introduce something as we explore World War II, I wanted to bring in somebody in my community who had been a part of World War II so that they could share those life's experiences. So I think enrichment serves as a pathway for understanding our disciplines, for understanding the content. And so as an educator, it's almost like you're better off showing a documentary about a time period and then working backwards to teach the content than saying, I don't have time for the documentary because I got too much to cover. It serves as a hook. It serves as a experience that can become the Velcro for all this other stuff that doesn't make sense to kids. So many times there are introductory level experiences, such as at sports camps or organizations that are running rocketry clubs at a very introductory level. But then it could be that that same organization might have rocketry stage 2 or level 3. So what you have to do to make sure it's all appropriate is making sure that the child's ready for the experience. And what I mean by ready is, and I use the example of the chess clubs. If you've never played chess, best not to be involved in that competition quite yet. Better be playing with it. I mean, I remember my mother had hoped that I'd become an accomplished pianist. And so she got that piano and I was going to be the pianist. But she did something smart. She let me play with the piano. And she found a teacher who sang with me off key all the time. Didn't matter because I wasn't hitting the right notes. And there was all joy in it. So many times these levels of interest get developed through the joyfulness of the experience. And then we get hooked. And then what happens is pretty soon, as my mother did, she said, Mrs. Rudd had one level of experience. We're now moving to another teacher. And that teacher didn't sing as frequently because she was trying to get my fingers to go to the right spots. She worked more on skill development. Had my mother put me with that teacher to start with, I'm not so sure I would have continued with piano. Yeah. Did I move into the kind of level of expertise she wanted? No, I found other areas of interest, such as vocal. And the same thing happened. Fell in love with vocal, played with sang with a group, had such great joy in it. I spent so much time doing it, then doing theater. And then the levels of expertise through advanced enrichment allowed me to do other things. So I think we have to know our kids fairly well and know what they like and find that area of interest and know that sometimes when you go to the introductory level, you may find out you don't like it. That's okay. Because finding out what you like versus what becomes your area of interest and passion is real critical for enrichment.
So it's equally important to know what's not your passion as it is to find your passion.
I think so. I think with particularly advanced kids who seem to master everything, that becomes very difficult. I have a grandnephew who loves everything. He could be a philosopher, or he could be a lawyer, or he could be a jazz pianist. And his struggle is to figure out who he will become. So sometimes that multiple talent area becomes a little bit challenging. So I do think finding areas that you love, finding out about where you feel comfortable and then advancing that level of expertise in that field is really a nice way to see life.
So as you're increasing the depth of the complexity of what you're doing, then what happens exactly?
Yeah, it's pretty cool. If you think about a computer camp for kids,
Right.
and we used to offer them at still do at my university, you would have kids that come into it really kind of liking a computer, but not really knowing a lot of things about it or how to run it, or it was real introductory.
Mm-hmm.
What happens in that experience is that you're trying to give them a skill set that still has joy. It's not like knowing where your key, fingers need to go on the piano. But then we needed to have camps that have some more advancement. And what that meant was knowing how to run the computer, how to program the computer, how to do coding with the computer, how to fix that computer, how to maybe get you certification with Microsoft at a young age, so you can probably fix your own computers. So what happens in these camps or experiences is that, excuse me, you really have to assess how far in depth is somebody going to offer the enrichment. If you have a child that has, for example, the little boy that does the model cars, if he found a car modeling organization that's often part of hobby companies, hobby clubs.
Yeah.
And he went to an introductory piece. My gosh, he would just be bored out of his mind. And out of that sheer boredom, that may affect the behavior of the child. And it's not because they're misbehaving because there's no challenge. So challenge in the enrichment needs to be in alignment to what the kid already knows and can do. So we have to assess that level. Sending a child to too advanced of a camp for their skill set may make them feel extremely different, and also could erode a little bit of the efficacy a child has. So we just don't send them anywhere. As family and teachers, we really have to craft things around how ready are people so that we aren't making it so difficult that they won't attempt to enjoy it.
So there's a sweet spot in between boredom and frustration?
Yeah, very much so. Challenge is really cool. Challenge actually means that you have a curiosity. Sometimes it's a gap in your knowledge that you become extremely interested because you didn't know something worked like it was supposed to. And that keeps you motivated enough to persist and work hard because you want to figure it out, especially in your area of interest. Again, if it's going over the same stuff over and over and over again, then there is no need to attend whatsoever to what is being taught or learned, an expectation for learning. So as many of the kids, sometimes when we work with them, you have to find that sweet spot. What is it that they already know, have skill of, and where could I move them? And the interesting thing with kids who have some advancement in these areas of interest is that it may look beyond their age level. So an example, at the university when I lived in Montana, I offered a rocketry course during the summertime. And it was every day for 2 weeks, which is a long time, but we were going to build rockets that actually you launch from a pickup truck engine. Those are pretty large. Yeah. And you have to be certified to do that. So I had a gentleman that did that with me and had done that at a school that I was working at. But one day I get a call and I offered the camp for 10-year-olds to 16-year-olds. I put an age limit on it. Well, I got a call at the university from an 8-year-old. And he said, "This is Daniel. And my mom told me to call you because I'm very interested in rockets." And so I said, "Daniel, could you tell me about your area of interest?" "Well, I build rockets." "Well, how many rockets do you have?" 14. 14 rockets that you've built? He said, "Yes. I've run out of kits," he said. And I said, "Well, can you tell me a little about rocketry and apogee and all the above?" And the kid went on for about 45 minutes. And he said, "The reason I'm really calling you is I want to come to the camp and I'm only 8. And he said, "You put an age limit on it. I don't think age limits should be on the things that you love." I said,
Oh,
"Daniel, you know what? I think you nailed it right on the nose. You're absolutely correct. And so I need you to come. And I need you to realize there'll be older students there. Will you be comfortable with that?" He said, "Oh, yeah, as long as they love rockets, we'll be okay." And you know what? He was. He was just fine. His attention was at probably more of a heightened level because he had that interest.
mm,
Age should not have deterred that young man. He taught me a lesson. Not all kids would have fit in because of the skill level, but he
right.
had the prior knowledge and skill. And so he should have been allowed to come.
And the phenomenon that some parents talk about is what you might call tasting. Like, "Oh, that looks sparkly. Let's do that." But then, a couple of hours into the thing, they're like, "I don't like this, mommy."
Yeah. I think that is kind of typical. Exploration and enrichment should be an opportunity to try things on.
Mm,
And I think oftentimes the kids just aren't given the opportunity to try those things on. And so they make judgment calls on whether they'll like it, whether they won't like it, based on really no experience whatsoever.
yeah.
But, I'm not so sure we often say to them, we should find things that we love. Find
Mm,
things that you love, that you enjoy, that you like to do for long periods of time.
mm,
I think even with the students I worked with, there were kids that kept the area of interest for 6 years that I worked with them. Other
wow.
kids were trying on things.
Mm,
And so I think it's really an individual basis. What we have to be careful of is sometimes I may have a family member who has this intense area of interest and they're wanting their kid to have it too. And sometimes that doesn't work out. Sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. And so I think talking about areas of interest, exposing kids to large exposure of things, sometimes I become interested thinking that I won't be interested. And it could be the person that's doing the work.
ah,
So sometimes becoming interested by somebody who also does that field. Like I'm interested in filmmaking. I've never made a film, but I'm interested in filmmaking. So I studied Ken Burns. Who thought I'd study Ken Burns? And I signed up for masterclass because I'm interested in Ken Burns and how he does his work and his thinking. And eventually I'll take my film course. So sometimes we don't even know that we might be interested. And so but we got to try it out. And so I don't want to keep kids in things that they absolutely hate because somebody thinks it would be good for them. I don't think that's the way you develop passion.
6 years of violin for this kid was way too.
Yeah, perhaps if you'd been in a fiddle group, fiddling with other kids, you might have. I mean, it's interesting because it could be the way that it's taught or the exposure you have or the person that was offering it to you. That's why the mentors that I love working with, when I used to arrange them for kids based on their areas of interest, are the ones that are still playful with their field. They still find it fascinating. They still find it interesting enough to ask a question about their own field, even though they have so much expertise. So sometimes finding the right people too to match our child with. It could be these enrichment experiences could be delivered by mentors who are experts in ornithology or language, or they love writing novels, and your child enjoys writing as well. So sometimes it's the delivery, I think, of the enrichment that kind of sparks the interest of kids.
So where might a parent look for such a person?
Well, every summer, but also fall and winter, sometimes your local universities, if you're in a community that has a local university, oftentimes they will offer summer camps for kids. I think it's important to really examine those camps, particularly for advanced kids who have these areas of who can move at a faster rate or even have the skill. Often those camps, especially if there's summer camps for kids who have been identified in gifted programs, oftentimes the running of those camps really have a different focus. They really go more into depth. And they often hire people to run the numerous options that kids can select from because they have interest and also talent in that field. For example, when we ran our camps, I hired a university professor to teach a bunch of 10-year-olds coding because he had been an executive for Microsoft and now just happened to be teaching at the university. That's not kind of teaching you usually get when you're 10 years old.
No.
And so would I want to put all kids with him? Probably not, but after taking a look at the skill set of a kid, yes. So
got it.
Universities offer camps, museums offer camps.
Right.
Theater companies offer camps for kids because they're trying to develop a bunch of young actors in the field.
Yeah.
When I was in Montana, I belonged to the Audubon Society, and kids could join. There was no age limit.
Wow.
And so my little group had a 90-year-old, me being 40 at that time probably, and a 10-year-old. And we were all, yeah. And what we shared was the love of birds. We didn't care about age, dissipates at that point. I know that greenhouses offer sometimes opportunities for kids to learn about gardening and bulbs, and hobby shops. Your local gaming hobby shops often have camps. Oftentimes I will call somebody that I know that's really good about something and they'll arrange something. I also think the internet has provided lots of opportunity for documentaries and DIY projects for kids in STEM and engineering. I think that world has opened up. Of course, I love the interaction live, but I think interactions, if I was in rural Montana, we may not be able to get that. And so coming together and coalescing with a group of people interested in what I was interested in, technology would work for me then. So it could be in any area. I think 4-H offers a lot of opportunity for enrichment, because as a 4-H'er, you choose things that you're interested in pursuing. It's just not about cows. It's not just about growing that cow to sell it at the fair. They do photography, they do horticultural kinds of things. So I think book clubs, writers, we had a young girl that came to a workshop of arts, and she was really an accomplished writer for her age. So putting her with an adult writing club was actually a good match. She was 16, but who cares? She was with a bunch of people who loved to write and get published. So, and I also noticed at here in Spokane, Washington, we have a culinary kitchen place, and they're offering classes for us to learn how to cook Thai food or really great pizza, but they're offering a whole series for kids. And I thought, well, how cool is that? I kind of want to go to that one. But so I think they're everywhere. You just have to pay attention to what's out there in your community. quilting clubs, kids who love the arts and abstract art, getting into a really cool quilting group is kind of cool. It really just, there's so many fascinating topics that can be explored in a whole bunch of different ways.
Why are these kinds of activities so vitally important particularly for our bright and twice exceptional kids?
Well, I think, well, there's a whole bunch of things that they offer. I think enrichment allows you to go more in depth in the area of interest. Again, I think that's critical because it helps you to identify who you are. Some of our twice exceptional kids have these areas of interest and they feel a little bit alone because they may be so advanced that no one around them has that area of interest. And it seems odd for a younger person to embrace something that seems older. I think we find friendship not only with others who share our interests, but we find friendship in the thing that we love. I know that sounds weird. But if you're a reader of biography, you don't read biography just to know a little bit of gossip. You read it to understand who you are. You're looking into a mirror, opening a window to find out what similarities you have. So sometimes that area of enrichment or interest serves as a key for the development of who you are. That's a deep connection. I think a lot of people think enrichment is just fun and games. It's
right.
Not. It's a doorway to passion, interest, career, lifelong contributions, and more importantly, the ability to surround yourself with others who love what they love. And you don't feel alone. And that could be one person who shares that interest, like a mentor, buddy, or it could be groups of people. So for some of our 2E students, the match may be better with a mentor than it is with a whole group of kids that may create more social anxiety for them. If that's the case, then we narrow down the group, but we keep the area of interest alive. I don't want a mentor trying to force their area of interest on a child. That's not, it won't work. That will feel like teaching.
Yeah.
But when you match the child with the mentor can shape their work around what that child actually wants to do. But I think we find peers who love what we love, and that peer group doesn't matter the age. I think that's really critically important. Because like this little boy who does cigars, his new best friends are movie producers. So, you know, it's not like he's sitting around with his high school buddies and he's happy. We've looked that happiness isn't the same for everybody. And so I think some of our kids who have these intense interests have happiness in different ways, which are just as critically important and sometimes better.
Well, that's the end of my questions, but we have some that were written by our audience. And what you just talked about segues beautifully into the first question, which is, how do I identify appropriate enrichment activities for my child? So rather than, you know, well, I was an artist, so you're going to go to art class.
Yeah.
How do I'm an artist and my kid doesn't show any interest in art. How do I figure out what's a good match?
Yeah, I think we have to listen really carefully to what our kids kind of like. Providing an opportunity to go places and participate in things is an important initiating experience. So going to a museum and looking at art that may be of interest to them, they may not even know that they appreciate art or know about art. I used to take my students, we'd load on the bus and go to a museum. Why? They'd never been to one. So what is you can't develop interest if you don't know about things. So I
Good
think
point.
part of our job as community people, but also families and teachers as well, is to introduce things to young people. I used to bring in stories about scientists who had invented new things to help people. And the kids would always ask, well, how did they get into that? Why did they do that? Well, what I was doing is just sharing stories. But those stories eventually touch some kid who says, gee, I'd like to know more about that. But I think we have to listen. We have to have deep conversations with kids. We have to say, are you interested in going to blah? Or we're going to blah. And when we're there, let's think about some questions that we would ask people. So some of these opportunities our kids will acquiesce towards because they now have an interest, or they will firmly tell you that's not what I like. But if we don't listen, if we don't watch what they're reading, if we don't watch what they're really passionately looking at on the internet in terms of documentaries, some of our kids are really documentary nuts. It's always interesting to me to see a 12-year-old extremely interested in time period through documentary. Well, it doesn't take rocket science to realize that you could get that child into recording oral histories of people in communities who have been a part of a time period that will lose the history if we lose the people. So listening carefully is important, and then feeding resources to the kids. I have a grandnephew who's quite the jazz pianist, and he loves it. And he's done it probably now for 12 years. And the step that moved him into another arena is when he began joining a community group of jazz musicians and playing for audiences. And he's gotten so good now that he can gain some summer employment, money for college. But, you know, he's happy when he does that. And we followed the lead by providing him with what he needed. He used to enjoy piano.
Just now that's very important, which is you need to follow their lead.
Yeah. You follow their lead, you get them access to the resources that they need. Even during a birthday, perhaps you feed them some materials that would help them do what they need to do, whether it's art or theater. You know, line the gift giving to the area of interest rather than just random gifts. Letting them go to a camp. My mother, unbeknownst to me, had signed me up for a camp. I lived in rural Montana. I'd never been out of the state, nor had my parents. That's rural. And she sent me to a leadership camp when I was 12 years old, and she won a scholarship for me. That's what was interesting about it. She won a scholarship for me. And it sent me to Michigan, Lake Michigan, which at 12 years old in rural Montana, you know, you can't even figure out where North Dakota is, for goodness sakes. But it introduced me to sailing and leadership and coalescing people together. It's an opportunity that was life-changing for me in terms of how we work towards things to solve problems. I mean, it was lovely. And those people have been lifelong friends, you know, and who would have known? So sometimes you don't know where the interest is going to lead you to. The parents can't predict it. But I think we need to listen, watch really carefully, and always talk about interest and passion. We want kids to adopt careers that will keep them motivated and interested, not necessarily the ones that will always make them enough money. But you know, to me, being interested is really a lifetime goal, and interest helps.
So an interesting question that came up is, what is the difference between acceleration and enrichment, and which one's better for my child?
Yeah, acceleration is a necessary thing. Because when you're advanced in an area of interest or even a subject area, those skills help you develop expertise. But the interesting thing is if that expertise and skill increases without relevance or meaningfulness for the child, which is what I think enrichment helps to do, then we could lose the child to not trying to, what is the purpose here? I still think that acceleration, if it's on a fast track and it has no interest, but it has more rigor, I guess is what, more rigor, but lacks interestingness. We get a lot of kids who know things, but they aren't any longer interested in the topic. And I have watched that with a grandnephew who took 4 or 5 AP courses in 1 year. And he could tell me which ones he was more interested in. And I said, why didn't you just choose the ones you were interested in? Why did you think you had to have all of them? Well, college. It was all about college. And I said, well, what made the AP course interested? Because it was accelerated. He said, the delivery of the content was interesting. It introduced me to some advanced skills that I needed for analysis purposes, but what we analyzed was fascinating and novel. And so I wanted to work hard at acquiring the skills because I found the content interesting. See, that interestingness is so important. So both are needed. We can't just do enrichment because enrichment's fun. Enrichment is about application and skill and learning how to do something. It's just not for fun. And we try to get kids to actually contribute by producing something that would be of interest to them. So both are critically important. One without the other, not so sure that works. I think you have to have the blend of both.
That's a really good point. So let's see, last question here. This is something that I experienced with my children as well. The school's always been easy for our child, and he's developed a path to an easy A. But I worry if he's really not truly learning, could enrichment and exploring other things be meaningful for him to learn how?
Yeah, I think definitely. So, I think there are going to be many times in life where kids are really going to be bored out of their mind, especially advanced kids, because they sometimes self-teach themselves. I mean, they're advanced because they came into the world wanting to learn. And it's not just because they had all of the genius to do it. They actually worked at doing it. They tried to experiment. They remember the old stove that they wanted to teach, and he said, no, hot. And they touched it anyway.
Absolutely.
And more experiences that you keep adding to your knowledge base and you are constructing meaning, you're eventually going to find it difficult to sit. It is going to be an easy A. But the option is to find out what's interesting within that topic, that perhaps they could even suggest areas that they could further explore with the teacher that could make the class much more interesting. I used to say to a student who very much could do almost anything in school without being taught, why don't you offer an alternative to the teacher? Let's try that. If you're interested in World War II, but you know all about it, there's an aspect that you might not know about. And of course, he'd say, it's this. Well, why don't you go in there and propose that is what you research, or that's what you bring a presentation to your classmates with. If we don't do that, sometimes I think children lose their agency.
You're right.
They lose their power. And you take power and agency away from children, and they become not happy people. So I can get my A, but I've got to go beyond that. And you're going to have to do that anyway. That child could grow up and take a college class, and the college class is going to be way too easy and they can't get out of it because it's a required course. knowing how to suggest an alternative rather than just complain about it is a better alternative because you have agency then. You know that you can change things to make it work for yourself.
I think agency is a huge piece, particularly when you know you feel a little different.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can contribute something
Mm-hmm.
and allowing other children to do the same who happen to have strong in a particular thing, and they can have a turn to do that too. They don't have to have a G on their forehead.
That's exactly right. All kids deserve agency. All kids deserve opportunity for exploring interests and passions. All kids do.
Yep.
And then watching which opportunity is going to help either introduce, extend, or accelerate that learning within that experience, in that discipline, in the topic is what our job is to do as family members and community and teachers.
Well, Dr. Leppien, it's been really, really enlightening and fun.
Yeah,
I always enjoy talking to you.
I thank you for the opportunity, and I wish for your participants of the webinar to be able to reach out to you and your certainly company as well for advice and also just some ideas for thinking about what they might do with their children.
Yeah, we do that. We're here for whoever happens to ring the bell or send an email.
Yep, we all try something. I'll leave on a note of a family member I worked with in Seattle, and their child was 2E and had not been in a public school for a very long time, but was allowed to take some community courses at a college as a high schooler.
Mhm.
She was fearful of him going to college, and I said, has he ever gone to a camp? And I said, not any old camp. I want to choose a camp and suggest a camp for you that has been around for a long time. And kids of all ages, but they work with the people in areas of expertise.
Mm.
Just being around somebody who shares that interest can lower the anxiety, can lower the level of anticipation, which has now allowed the child to leave the state of Washington and pursue his dream of being a neurobiologist. But it was just that one opportunity of being together in a camp for 2 weeks, realizing they could survive because people knew who he was and what he loved, and they were going to build life around that. I think that those are the things that change people, and they give you courage. So, yeah, interest means a lot. And it's not secondary to getting an A. It is life. It is what we do, and it is who we become.
I totally agree.
So we'll end there.
Well, thank you, and have a great time with your family there in Spokane, and enjoy your flight to Connecticut and perhaps there as well.
I'm looking to cooler weather, more humidity, but cooler weather.
We'll all cross our fingers for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.